So welcome to this week's edition of the Paint Box. My name is Jane Roa, and I am here with Kevin Bice. I'm kind of going to let Kevin introduce you, but all I want to say to you, is that I've admired you and your work for so many years.
Thank you.
And when I was looking at trying to start my own artistic journey, you were one of the people I wanted to come and talk to. You were incredibly helpful in terms of, learning how to learn. And I just appreciated that so much, that you kind of gave of your time and your effort. Kevin's been an art teacher, a high school art teacher, comes from a very strong artistic family. I mean, was told us stories about obviously going out painting with his dad, Kevin Bice, but one of the founders of the studio tour.
Yes.
And just really believes strongly in the arts and the community arts, getting people involved. So have I missed anything?
No, I think you're right about, one of the unique things that it took me a while to realize was unique was that when I was growing up, I was in a house where the arts were an everyday event. Like for some people, it may be sports. For some people, it could be something else. But in our house, there were artists coming and going. My sister was a curator and a director of a gallery. Wow. My dad was the director of a gallery, was an illustrator. And I just kind of assumed that wasn't unusual.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that is true. There's some folks who came from families. In fact, I was speaking to an artist today who came from a family that didn't value that quite as much. So finding her artistic journey was a bit of a longer process. But when you tell me some of the stories of your youth and you going painting with your dad, it was kind of amazing.
Well, it was interesting. My dad always went on 2 painting trips every year. One was in the fall when he'd go up to Combermere, Golden Valley, sort of south of Algonquin Park.
Yep.
And he started that back in the late 30s, mid-30s, when he met A.Y. Jackson, A.J. Casson, and Franklin Carmichael. And they, of course, had been sketching outdoors, and Dad had been doing it sort of for a while. So they started going up to that area every fall. And then in the spring, he would go to the East Coast. Loved painting the ocean, loved painting boats, loved the whole atmosphere of the East Coast. So he would go to Newfoundland one year, and then the following year he'd go to Nova Scotia, and then he'd alternate. Yeah. So I always kind of hoped that he would ask me to come along, but it wasn't until I was working and living in Sault Ste. Marie that he gave me a call and said, do you want to come on this trip? He was actually delaying his normal time, which was in the 1st of June, so that I could come once I started my holidays. So I had never really, I'd always dabbled, you go out and you take your sketchbook and you're all pretentious about it. And so I went with a guy who, this wasn't just a father-son kind of pleasant holiday. This was a working holiday for 2 weeks. So I found out pretty quickly what that meant.
You talk about how you used to describe yourself as a self-taught artist, but now you really consider yourself a self-directed artist.
Yes.
So did you find, kind of growing up within that environment, like, did your dad not encourage you, or was it more you just lived within that environment and so you kind of sucked it up a little bit and sopped it up in terms of, and then found an affinity? He
didn't hide it. Yep. I don't think he ever said, don't you think you should be sketching? It was simply what you did in the house. Yeah. It was, my sister drew, I drew all the time. We'd paint. It was a normal activity. And I think that was an important thing for my dad. It was that art be considered an activity that anybody could do, that anybody should do, and that's part of life. Right. So that was I remember having the conversation when I was in high school. First of all, going to the first years of high school, and then again choosing university. Yeah. And at that point, I thought, well, should I go to Beale, which was had an art program? Should I go to a school that's got a fine art department at the university? And he always said, you got to make sure you have 2 strings to your bow. So I ended up with a degree in English. Yeah. That was what I took out of this idea, was that I remember talking to somebody at a workshop and saying, well, what do you do? And they said, I paint florals in watercolor. And I thought, really? That's pretty narrow. Yeah. So what I think I took out of my growing up was that you make things. You're a maker.
Yeah.
You know, you're not a painter. You're not a floral watercolor.
You're a creator.
You're a creator. So I got involved in theater. I did sets and directing and even some acting. We sing in choirs.
You do graphic design.
I do some graphic design, some programs. So to me, you simply make things. You get involved in creating things. And that lack of differentiation is, I think, really important. So
one of the things you were and are is actually, you're very passionate about teaching, aren't you, as well, in terms of, can you explain a little bit more about why you are so passionate about teaching? Because those are two different skill sets. You know, the greatest artist is not necessarily the best teacher.
No.
And you have to be kind of, you know, passionate about somebody else's journey.
Yes. So I think if somebody said, which do you think you're better at, I would say teaching. I think the problem is when you're a teacher, you can't stop being a teacher. So any situation becomes a teaching moment, you know. And I think when I stopped teaching at school, I found that I was doing more theater, which is, if you're directing, you're teaching an idea. I would do workshops, we'd travel. Teaching to me was trying to get this idea that I'd grown up with to be a normal idea for the people I met. That's the important thing.
And that becomes especially important as many of us, like myself, maybe had an artistic journey when we were in our teens, but you tend to leave it. And as we get older, we come back to it, or we try to go along this creative journey. But where do people like me, or where do other people go? You end up attending workshops, or you end up coming to someone like you for a little bit of advice on how do we learn? How do we know what we don't know?
Well, I think that's the thing that's always fascinated me, is how do people learn things? It's really interesting seeing how people take in information. It's really interesting seeing how people respond in a situation. Just taking friends, for example, to Venice or Rome for the first time, and watching them when they encounter something that I know well and they've seen the first time. And that kind of thing, to me, I find fascinating, because how do you take that information? What do you do with it when you have encountered this kind of thing? And that's the really exciting part.
Also, I find oftentimes artists who are not teachers will teach you how to paint like them. As opposed to teach you to learn how to discover what you're into, which is, again, that part of that whole teaching mindset.
When I am asked to do workshops, I usually start by saying I don't do technique workshops. There are people who do it very well. They have very good systems for teaching a particular way of handling paint or drawing or composition or whatever. I am much more comfortable teaching people how to develop ideas, how to come up with ideas, how ideas grow, how to choose your approach based on the idea and what you're trying to do. To me, that's rarely taught. And that, to me, is probably the most important thing.
Actually, that's really, really interesting, though, because when I think about art, or how I learned about art, it was the idea that mattered. In terms of, or the historical artworks that have come through history to us. So the ones we consider masterpieces, it's the idea that kind of matters behind it.
You'll find a way to, if the idea is so strongly embedded in you, you'll find a way of expressing it. And you may have thought you were going to make a drawing, and you might end up writing a play. You know, you make something with that idea. I think this is a big problem now, because we live in a culture where ideas aren't particularly valued. The medium is. So for me, and I'm old, let's face it,
He's not that old.
The example is TikTok. So somebody can do something sitting in their bedroom, which seems to me skillless and et cetera, and they can have thousands or millions of viewers. So it's the medium that's fascinating. It's the approach. It's the presentation that's fascinating. The idea is often pretty banal.
I do find that, particularly when people are learning to paint, they go for their ideas on Pinterest, or they look at other people's art. And you end up kind of following those ideas and think that you can therefore create yourself. But oftentimes you can't, because you haven't sort of gone through that process.
Mind you, looking at other people's work is very important, because one of my best moments was when our granddaughter, Sophia, was 11.
Yeah.
She and her parents went with us to Italy.
Yeah.
So we were in Venice at but it was a 14th century palazzo, no, 18th century palazzo. And on the top floor was the family's art collection, which consisted mainly of sort of early 19th, late 18th century kind of stuff. And it wasn't the kind of thing that I particularly liked. A little bit florid, a little bit, kind of corny.
Yeah.
And so Sophia and I were up there and we were walking around, and I think her parents and Daphne had gotten tired and they'd gone there waiting for us downstairs. And I was kind of trying to hurry Sophia up. And she said, "Wait a minute, Papa, wait a minute. I haven't seen everything yet." And that just blew my mind, that this 11-year-old was encountering this stuff. It fascinated her. She didn't want to miss anything.
Oh, wow.
And that was really exciting.
Yeah. Well, talking about seeing things, seeing things for me sometimes gets really discouraging. When you look at other people's artists and
every artist
oh
thinks
my
that.
goodness, it's like, there's so many wonderful ideas, so many wonderful artists and techniques. But talking about seeing things, can we take a peek around your studio?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
Actually, that would be amazing. Okay. Yeah. Let's hang on. Let's go.
Okay.
Okay. Now we're sitting in Kevin's studio a little bit. So this is where you create. So I'm now behind the camera walking around.
Okay.
But we came up the stairs, which is quite fascinating in and of itself in terms of some of the pieces. And we looked left, where there's slides. And so what happens over here?
Well, it gets used for different things. These are sketchbooks, which to me are probably the best things that I do.
Yeah.
And I use this area I'll sometimes write ideas down here. Yeah. If I have to do some preliminary drawing or going over things, it's a good place to sit. The books here mainly deal with drawing, illustration. This is actually a whole collection of my dad's books that he wrote and illustrated.
Yeah.
And my sister is involved in some of these. Yeah. Then I've got books on illustration and various things.
Do you ever come back to the books for more inspiration?
Oh, yes, all the time. Yeah. When I come to the studio, no matter how long I'm here for, I always spend the first half hour either on the internet looking some artists up or just going through the books. Yeah. You need to get your brain started up if you've been doing something else.
So we walk over here in terms of some more of the process.
Yeah, so this area I use for watercolor a lot, and also I have what I call idea books. So started many years ago, and when I was teaching, often there was no time to paint, so I would jot things down. Sometimes go through old photographs I had. Yeah. And when I was teaching, sometimes I wouldn't get to them for months or even years. So that's kind of idea central.
So there's our tea and our cookies.
Yes.
Kevin made tea and cookies, which is amazing.
In Newfoundland, when you visit somebody, you never have a bare leg tea. So you're offered tea, and there's usually something to eat. Because it would be rude if you had.
And the Bices are famous for their lemon loaf.
There you go. Yeah.
So there, of course, is your palette, your watercolor.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And actually, that back in there behind is a picture of my dad.
Oh.
When he was up in Cumbermere area, Algonquin Park area, painting.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Old photograph.
That's amazing. Okay.
And then sometimes you come up with ideas, and I just stick them up there and leave them in front of myself to
percolate.
To let it percolate. And sometimes they percolate a long time.
Then you have two easels. This is where you do your main painting, your easels. So your brushes and your medium are here.
Actually, some of those brushes were my dad's brushes.
Oh,
so some of those brushes are very old.
Wow.
Yeah.
You've got lots of photos up for reference. You have your easel, your crank easel, and then you look up and there's paintings that you've done. So you do your ideas, you figure out, you plan what you're going to do, and then you come over here and you execute it. So one of the things you talk about is you're not, as you said, you're not an oil painter who just paints florals. you create whatever needs to.
I usually say it's because I have a short attention span. I wish I had a longer attention span and I could stick to one subject for a long period of time. It would make it so much easier coming up here.
Well, it's true, but I remember you talking about a theme that still runs through most of your work, which is
light. Is
light.
Anything? That's what always stops me.
Yeah.
This morning when we got up, as soon as the sun came up over the trees, the mist started up from the river, wherever the sun hit it, and I didn't get out to take photographs, but things like, as soon as that's what occupies my mind.
Right. I mean, you're doing back figurative work. You've got some still life.
Yeah.
And I do also remember you talking a bit about how you were really fascinated about man's relationship to their environment.
Oh yeah, that's a theme I come back to a lot. I got fascinated because way back when I found an old family photograph album. Mm-hmm. It really intrigued me that these people were looking at me through the photograph in this object, and I knew I was related but couldn't figure out what it was. So that idea of your relationship to history. The other thing I've been fascinated by and you'll see them downstairs, are objects that have been handled. Yeah. So, and ordinary objects. So I've got a tin cup. I've got a drawing I was doing of a chair that might have been used backing behind there. It may or may not be completed. Or the cardboard box. Everybody's used to these, the Amazon box arriving. Yeah. To me, it's more about what was in the box and why they ordered it and whether they were happy with it. Right. Particularly, I spent a couple of weeks in Museum London. Yeah. They let me just have a look around at all the objects and make notes and photographs. I think I put them in one of my books. And so I've been working through them. They're not pictures so much of the object themselves. So these are objects that were in the museum. Yeah. And sometimes I just put the accession number and then the people who handled them. Yeah. There's a group of ones there, a toaster, an iron. Oh. And all those things have been in a family for years, and they're dinged and banged up and scratched. So it's really more a picture of the family than it is of a toaster or a meat grinder. Yeah. And that's really interests me. Yeah.
So again, this really speaks to the idea. I mean, yes. The idea that you're following through, as you say, it's not just a teacup.
No. And I think the idea, I'm going to modify that a little bit, because sometimes people separate the idea from the making of art. So if an idea is very political or very current, sometimes it's all about the idea, and you could have done it just as easily with a poster marching around in the park, or writing an essay or writing a letter to the editor. So the idea has got to be realized partly through the image, but also partly through the medium. So why are you using charcoal? Why are you using oil paint? Why are you using watercolor? Okay. That's got something to do with it. And I've done paintings and drawings that have combined media because they each seem to reflect some aspect of the idea.
That's actually really interesting. That takes a lot of thought. Can we actually go see some of those?
Absolutely.
Yes,
sure.
let's go down. Yeah. And then we'll come back up.
Okay.
So I've been on the studio tour and come and visited your house, and it was always filled with people, which was great, but we loved coming and seeing all the paintings on the walls.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, you've got a gallery here.
Yeah.
And some recent paintings.
So this is a combination of things. These were on location sketches, and then these were done in the studio from that. Yeah. And so they got different aspects. When you're outside painting, you're preoccupied with how much you're going to put in, what the light is, how you render that. Yeah. When you get back to the studio, you've solved those problems. Now you can start to think a little more about what you're going to do with it.
Right. Yeah. And of course, the cookies.
Cookies, yeah. Who's been baking. So this is
an example of the memory.
Yes, and so this is the view out front of the cottage of Lake Huron. Yeah. The three boys, my dad's the one on the left, and his brother's the one on the right. Yeah. The chair was a chair that was always on the porch, and my sister's favorite thing was to sit there with a glass of wine and a good book.
Yeah.
So it's about how we remember things and how memories are triggered by things.
Landscape and memory.
Yeah, exactly.
Landscape and memory. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
This one I should tell you about.
Oh, yeah. This is the one on the front of your website.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this one was. There's 2 other paintings underneath that.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
it started just a straightforward picture of the cottage. Yeah. The problem is that I got 90% finished. It was just boring.
Yeah.
So I thought, what am I going to do? So for some reason, decided that doing a picture of 3 figs would be a good idea. So I turned 180 degrees and started these figs, and that didn't work out at all. So then I thought, I know, I'll do a painting of what every painter dreads, right?
Yeah.
It's the blank canvas.
It's the blank canvas.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah. There's your dad's.
Yeah, this is probably 100 years old. The reason I don't use it anymore is it's very wobbly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to fall down. It's just hard to paint on it.
Yeah. And then let's just go peek.
So
I'm stalking Kevin as we go through.
These ones here.
Oh, here are the objects.
So these are all in the museum, and there's numbers on each of them, the accession numbers for the library. So each one of them has obviously been well used by a family somewhere.
Yeah.
And if you look really closely at the cup, the beautiful thing about the charcoal is that it handles texture and surface really well. So if you go in right close, you can see it's really the perfect medium for that.
Sure.
This one, again, the cottage, this is my mom in about late 1930s. These are the keys to the cottage that we had to sell, and this is the view out in front of the cottage. 1939 was an interesting year because for a lot of people, before Canada and the U.S. and Britain were drawn into the war, it was just a summer like every other summer. And so here she is about age 19 or so, and she's
just hanging out.
And of course, things are going to change very rapidly. And one of the things that changed was she had 3 brothers and sisters. One of the brothers was killed about 3 weeks after D-Day.
Oh, wow.
So if you come around the end, all around the edge of the picture are excerpts from the last letter he wrote before he was killed.
Okay, so let's check out one more and then let's head back upstairs.
Here.
This is like coming to a gallery.
Well, I always say that the real reason I paint is because it's cheaper than buying them. So these are all Italy. That's Venice. It's the square or the boat repair yard at San Travaso. Most tourists, if they're walking through Venice, will find that, and you usually see the gondolas, but I was kind of fascinated by this guy working away. Over here, the little sketch was done on the island of Torcello, which has a wonderful 11th century cathedral on it. Except that I'm sitting in the shadow of the cathedral painting a concession stand. And then the one in the studio. And of course, Italian coffee. And the house is a house owned by friends of ours.
Okay, let's head back upstairs. So we're back actually from the little walk around, and we were just talking about how we see someone else's art and it's not just awe-inspiring, but you kind of go, what am I doing? It's like, what am I doing? I think what I really appreciated, obviously technically to me you seem like wonderful and amazing, and I know, but like the ideas you're talking about, where that being the core and being really important is huge.
Well, it's interesting you talk about technical. I have a degree in English from Western. I didn't take art. The Faculty of Fine Arts started at Western my last year there. And I was one of the first 13 students, and it was very, very basic course. So when I said I used to say I was self-taught, of course, I'm still stealing and learning from everybody. But in some ways it was an advantage because I had to figure out how I learned it in order to teach other people. And of course it's a disadvantage in that people talk about color theory and I really have any clue what they're talking about.
Yeah, but when you talk about talk to artists who have taken either degrees, diplomas, they talk about how their real journey started after they left school.
Yeah.
Because obviously they've been given some technical knowledge, but they still have to refine it, they still have to get better, and
you've got the tools.
You've got the tools, and you've got to discover your voice. So,
well, that's the key, and I think very often people, especially if they're not professional artists, think that they'll hang their confidence on taking workshops with other people, and you think, what if I'm on my own, can I handle that? So that's kind of frightening. You can go to a workshop and you can learn a new technique, and then you go home and you think that's pretty terrific.
Yeah, or you can follow typical subject matter or take photos, but it's not necessarily your voice until you start doing it yourself and practicing it.
Well, I took a class in watercolor way back when I started teaching up in Sault Ste. Marie from a guy named Zoltan Szabo, who well known for producing watercolor technique books. He taught very much the technique. You sprinkle salt on wet watercolor and it'll all those tricks. He certainly knew technically how watercolor worked. And I remember at the end of the series of classes, we had a little exhibition. I looked around and I thought, they're all Zoltan Szabos.
Yeah.
Nobody's voice is here except his.
And that's what a great teacher does, is helps people develop their own voice in terms of those things. And locally, London has a rich history of Canadian artists. So you talk about Kernos.
Yeah, London has a very, very rich...
Jack Chambers.
Daphne used to babysit for his kids. But I think one of the problems in London right now is we have this huge history. We tend to think of it as only the 60s decades with those guys. But, I mean... For as long as there's been a city, there has been a wonderful group of artists coming through the city, and there still are. I mean, we look at the number of, there are 3 or 4 major painting groups, amateur painting groups, with 75 or 100 members in each group. And they're all very enthusiastic and very keen. We've got, the studio tour has been going for 30 years. I think the problem in London is that it's not on the horizon of most people. Musicians in London have done a very good job of proclaiming London a city of music. I think we could just as easily call it a city of the arts, because it's a wonderful theater. We've got some fantastic writers. This could be the real international draw in this city.
If we were to bring all of those silos together, right?
And how do we do that?
I don't know. That could be a topic for a different day.
Oh yeah, so I think you need to talk to Julie Bevan.
I will go see Julie Bevan, amongst others, because we've got a rich history of folks who have been involved in the arts historically and have been trying to do that.
Well, Dennis Garnham, when he was here, that was his mandate, was at London Proud World Curious, and he really wanted to connect us to the world, wanted to explore the resources that are here. That's very, very important. It's something we don't do in London.
Yeah. If this makes it for another season, we'll come and have another conversation with it, because I think these are some big ideas which are pretty amazing to talk about.
I'll tell you, one of the things that you may even have been there was a wonderful sort of kind of a combination of TED Talk and forum of artists at the Grand Theatre a number of years ago, and they were talking about what is creativity. And Andrew Lewis was one as a designer. There was the woman who was the head of artistic fraud theatre in Newfoundland. And somebody said, well, what's the first step in creating something? And she said, for her, as a playwright, an actor, and a director, it's standing up and walking forward and opening your mouth. Because you've committed yourself to an action, something's going to come out.
Something's got to come out,
Now something has to happen. If you don't do that, nothing creative happens.
But again, what I really love about this talk is that's what matters. That's the idea. It's the thought. And whatever it is that it takes to get to that thought, that's what we have to do. So, Kevin Bice, thank you so much for allowing us into your world a little bit. Thank you for stretching mine and stretching ours a bit.
Good,
it's actually great. So, thank you.
Thank you.